the reasons they hired me was because I was fluent in Mandarin and I could read and write Chinese.
Mhm.
I think for sure it's all about using the language. You can only do so much with textbooks. I felt the real learning experience was being outside with my friends and my roommates and hanging out with them. I did a 7 or 8 minute comedy set. I told maybe like 10 or 12 jokes in Mandarin.
Hello, and welcome to the Learn Chinese Insights podcast, brought to you by ChineseTrack.com. Every week we interview expats from around the world who have learned Chinese as a second language to find out how they learned it and how they use it in daily life. In today's episode, I'm happy to have Adam Bell. So Adam, before we get started, why don't you give us a quick intro in Chinese? Tell us where you're from, what you do around here, and then we'll go from there.
Sure. 大家好，我是Adam Bell。我是美国人，来台湾快20年，我也在中国大陆也待过8年，所以我天天用中文。我学了好几年，我的爱好就是常常练习新的语言，新的表达我自己的做法。所以我很开心有这个机会跟你们分享我的经验。
Very nice. All right, so you've mentioned you've been in Taiwan for a while. So what brought you to Taiwan in the first place?
So originally I came as a single semester exchange student. I was planning to graduate the following semester after I went back to the US. And they passed around a sign-up sheet at the end of the semester asking which students were going to be staying on because they wanted to separate the classes and reseat the classes. And I just couldn't resist. So I put my name on and called my mom and the bursar's office at UMass and said, I'm sorry, I'm not coming back. So stuck around for another semester.
All right, so the semester you were here was taught in English?
No, it was Mandarin. I studied at the Donghai Daxue Huayu Zhongxin, and I was there for, 2 semesters, and both semesters I was taking, I believe, 5 courses per semester, or 5 classes per day, more or less. So it was 4 group classes, and then a one-on-one class. I did that every day for, 2 semesters.
So when you started, were you starting from scratch?
No, I came here after having studied 2 years of Chinese at my university back in the States. So I took a Chinese 101, Chinese 102, Chinese 103, Chinese 104. And actually, I took some elective courses as well. That was probably a bad decision because there were linguistics courses that were way over my head, but I signed up for them, and all my classmates were grad students. I don't know how they let me into those classes, but that was helpful in some ways because I got a lot of exposure to kind of the more challenging aspects of the language, from a linguistics perspective, as opposed to just studying the vocabulary and grammar and pronunciation.
So when you had studied Chinese in the US, was that a solid foundation when you got here?
I wouldn't say so. When I came over, like I said, I had basically 4 semesters of conversational Chinese under my belt, but I wasn't fluent by any means. So when I got here, I could order a meal, I could greet people and be polite, but I wasn't fluent in any means.
So when you took the language center in Donghai, would you say just being here and like learning during the day and then being able to use that Chinese in the evening when you're out and about, that was kind of helpful?
Oh, 100%. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, because you're limited if you're learning abroad, then you don't get to use that Chinese.
Right. And so I was also enrolled in the program that allowed me to sleep in the dorms. Mm-hmm. So I had a dorm room at Donghai, and I had 3 roommates. So they were all local students. And so every day when I came back to the room, they were there or coming or growing. And sometimes we go play basketball, or we'd go to the library together and study together, go to meals together. I'd hang out with them and their friends. So I got a lot of exposure that way as well.
So this is a full immersive environment.
100%.
Yeah.
And also, I would say that the Huayu Zhongxin, the language center, there were a lot of international students from, other countries, not just, American students. So there were ample opportunities for me to practice speaking Chinese to other non-native Chinese speakers. So, for example, Japanese students who were here studying, they would like to hang out and throw parties, and I would go hang out with them from time to time. And our common language was Mandarin, so that was also very helpful.
So you said you were at the language center for what, 1 year, 2 years?
Well, I was there for a year,
Uh-huh.
and then after I left, I went back to the States,
Okay.
and I stayed at the university for one more year back in the States before I graduated. And then after graduation, I moved back to Taiwan, came here during the summer and worked in a summer camp, and did that for basically, I think maybe a month and a half, 6 or 8 weeks, something like that. And then came back down to Taichung, re-enrolled at the language center, basically took all the money I had saved over the summer from the summer camp job and just invested it into tuition for the fall semester. And got an apartment, started studying Chinese again at the Huayu Zhongxin, and kept that up for another 1, 2, 3, 4, almost 5 semesters before I left academics and went on to start working.
So you finished your second stint at the language center. So after you completed that, like, what would you say your level of Chinese was?
Oh, I was 100% fluent by then.
Really? Yeah. And then you just started working here. Your plan was to stick on here.
Yeah, probably that. Let's see. I was there for about half the semester, and I had already started looking for work here in Taichung and ended up getting hired by a company in Daya district, went over there and basically started working full-time and dropped out of school and just became a full-time employee at a Taiwanese company.
So in that job also, it was in Chinese?
Yeah, well, it was mixed. So I was working in the international department. So I was communicating with overseas customers, salespeople in English, and then the local communication with the factory workers, plant manager, local logistics companies, these kinds of things, that was all in Mandarin.
So in your work, there must be a lot of new technical vocabulary and things that you had to pick up that weren't taught in school?
For sure, yes.
So what was your process for like learning new vocabulary?
Well, I think it's just on-the-job training. So a lot of the technical terms that I was picking up for the job were just vocabulary words that I needed to know, and I just learned them and used them. And by using them, every day, communicating with our team of people here, I was able to, kind of be familiar with those words and know how to use them. So
and
there's just a lot of vocabulary, really.
Right. So there's this Chinese that you require for work. Does it also require reading, writing, anything?
Sure, certainly.
Writing, like physically writing?
Yeah, in the past, I've definitely done a lot of writing, mostly like whiteboard writing for training. So as my job currently, I'm kind of the technical head of a fairly large, I'd say mid-sized company. And we do training in China, here in Taiwan. So I've done a lot of, whiteboard where I write things like maximum operating pressure, 最高工作压力, I'll write that on the board and put, the information there. I talk about, various aspects of water treatment systems and things like that. And I'm able to converse about those topics in Mandarin, as well as, write things about that. So a lot of my communication with, outside suppliers and things like that is in Mandarin. So I'm not doing a lot of handwriting so much anymore, but, I'm still texting or writing emails in Chinese.
So are there a lot of opportunities for foreigners like this who have like a high level Mandarin to work in companies like this?
Possibly. I worked in a couple of different companies when I was in China, and the reasons they hired me was because I was fluent in Mandarin and I could read and write Chinese. So, and of course there it was simplified Chinese.
Right.
So I do both simplified and traditional Chinese writing.
I see. So going back to your learning process at the language center, would you say most of the knowledge came from the actual sitting in the classroom, or is it also being able to use it like after school with your roommates and friends and whatnot?
Well, I think for sure it's all about using the language. You can only do so much with textbooks
Yeah.
and maybe some limited conversation with the teacher or your classmates. I felt the real learning experience was being outside with my friends and my roommates and hanging out with them. I also enrolled in a club, so I was part of the Donghai Sign Language Club. So I not only learned, reading and writing Mandarin, I can also speak Taiwanese sign language.
Oh, wow. And that's different from American Sign Language.
Yes.
So, looking back at this journey, if you were to come to Taiwan knowing no Chinese and just enter into a language center, and then in evening and then weekends, like you said, put yourself in this immersive environment, how long does it take to go from zero to being fluent?
I think for people that just want to learn to speak,
Uh-huh.
probably a couple years, they could probably, with some pretty intensive class time and also, using it, proactively outside of the class. I spent a lot of time sitting in a breakfast shop every morning, looking at the newspaper, trying to read the newspaper articles and discuss those kind of hot topics with the breakfast shop owner and his wife, and sometimes his children. So that was also, kind of a makeshift classroom for me that I just kind of created out of my own. So I would say if you can find those kinds of opportunities and couple them with, kind of classroom opportunities, then yeah, probably a couple years, I would say. I think maybe 1 year you'll get pretty good, but you won't be fluent, or you'll have a limit to the amount of conversation you can kind of dive into, and you'll still have a very thick accent. I mean, I get teased from time to time because I have, for some people they say, "Oh, you have a very thick American accent," and other people they say, "I wouldn't know you were American if I didn't see you." So I don't know if they're just being polite or what, but
Yeah, when I've noticed when I'm on the phone with a local and at some point they start putting in English words, then okay, I'm not doing a very good job. They figured out that I'm a foreigner and I need help or something like that.
right.
Yeah. So looking back on your journey of the process that you learned Chinese, it seems pretty efficient. Is there anything you would have done differently to speed up the process or anything that way?
Yeah, I guess I probably would have tried to limit my interaction with other Americans and Westerners a bit more. Uh, I didn't want to be like that. I'm a fairly sociable person. I'm very open, and I don't really kind of close myself off. There were some students that definitely, like American students, people that I went to school with in the U.S. or that I knew from my university program, that came here and really did kind of seal themselves off from other foreigners for the sake of just kind of immersing themselves in a Mandarin environment. And I definitely could tell that they were picking the language up faster. So that might be something that I would have changed. Another thing is recently, and I say recently, this is probably a couple of years now, I've been doing stand-up comedy as a kind of a side hobby. And I did
In Chinese.
yeah, so I started doing that. I did a couple of sets where I was, well, the biggest one I've done so far was a professor that retired, and I roasted him as part of the retirement party, and there was probably about 400 people in attendance, and I did a I don't know, 7 or 8 minute comedy set. I told maybe like 10 or 12 jokes in Mandarin. So I probably would have started doing that a bit earlier. I think that helps also with just being comfortable. Obviously trying to tell jokes and be funny in a foreign language is really hard, and just trying to challenge myself a bit earlier on. So it's fun. If you'd like to come and see me do a stand-up set in Mandarin, I can send you the details.
So does the humor work differently? Like normally things like sarcasm and stuff I find kind of different here versus out west. Is there a difference that you find?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely differences in the types of jokes that work, but most of my stuff is kind of anecdotal stuff, so I think it works in both languages. I mean, not all of my English jokes that I tell, will translate directly into Mandarin, but some of the ideas, you can still, kind of reword them or rehash them in Mandarin, and it still delivers, kind of a funny, setup and punchline.
So I know that you also have a daughter growing up here, who's the same age as mine. So she's growing up in a bilingual environment at home. Is your goal for her to be equally fluent in both languages, English and Chinese?
For sure. And she is. She's getting all her Chinese from her mother,
Uh-huh.
and she's getting all her English from me. So she's definitely got a preference for English, I would say. That's what I've noticed. In terms of reading, so when she picks up a book, she'd prefer to read an English book, I find. And I don't know if that's because of the language or difficulty reading or things like that. I think it's more about the types of stories that are available to her. Some of the content maybe is just more interesting for some of the English books. But she really enjoyed Charlotte's Web. So we found a Chinese copy of Charlotte's Web, and she read that and she enjoyed that. Same with like the Roald Dahl story, Matilda. She really enjoyed Matilda in English, and we found her a Chinese copy, and she read that and she enjoyed it. So I think it's just a matter of finding the books that she likes in both languages.
Mm-hmm. So the home environment is kind of a mixture of English and Chinese, and then her school's all in Chinese. Is that how it works?
Yeah, more or less. The school that she goes to, it's a Chinese-speaking school, but they do have, English classes with some foreign teachers. So she has one teacher who's a local Taiwanese who's, basically doing the more structured grammar drills and things like that. And then there's the other teacher who does, reading assignments with them, and they go through and they have some kind of, interactive dialogue and things like that in the classroom. So that I do, I help her with her homework. She doesn't really need it, but if she has a question, she can come to me. But for the most part, it's all, English with me and then Chinese with her mother. And her mother is really into calligraphy and writing Chinese calligraphy. So they do that together. She goes to Chinese calligraphy class on Wednesday afternoons after school. Mm-hmm. So she gets, additional, say, writing practice through that. And then her mother is really into kind of Chinese poetry, especially, kind of Tang Dynasty, Song Dynasty poetry, things like that. So she's also reciting a lot of poetry. And for the school, they have to do that as well. Part of their Chinese subject matter is poetry. So she's really into Chinese poetry. And it's funny to see her kind of observe something, in nature, or if we go on a trip and she sees something that reminds her of a poem, and then she'll actually recite snippets of poetry that, capture the emotion or the feeling from the observation. And, she's done that a few times, and it always brightens my wife's day.
Of course. Yeah. So that's great that she can get benefit from both cultures, right? From both sides.
100%.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate you sharing all these insights with us today.
My pleasure.
Thanks, Adam.
You're welcome, Adam.